So we have a major development in the nationwide battle over the pistol brace issue and whether or not those should be treated as SBRs under the NFA. This comes because the ATF has officially proposed removing the Biden-era pistol brace rule entirely. And on the surface, that sounds like this fight is now over. But here's the problem. A court legal battle may still actually be alive and going on. Because even while the ATF is removing the rule itself, they are still claiming the authority to regulate brace pistols under the statute alone. And that goes directly to the heart of one of the major cases that is still pending. So now the big question becomes, does this new proposed rule revolving around pistol braces actually end this litigation, or does it actually prove why this remaining lawsuit still very much matters? So let's break down what is now happening. Now, before we jump into this video, if you want to support the channel, one of the best ways to do that is simply by subscribing. You can also click the like button that just tells the algorithm that you appreciate this content, and so it shares it with more people. Now, as most of you know, this entire fight about pistol braces really started when the Biden administration issued the 2023 proposed, pistol brace rule, and then they finalized that. That rule attempted to classify a massive number of brace pistols as actual short-barreled rifles under the NFA. The ATF created an entire framework of factoring criteria looking at things like the weight, length, surface area, marketing, optics, and really just the overall configuration of various braced pistols. And under that system, millions of firearms were suddenly treated as potential NFA-regulated SBRs, and that immediately triggered a bunch of lawsuits across the country. Eventually, on review, one of the judges in a district court in the state of Texas issued a decision that was Judge O'Connor in the mock case, and he ruled against the ATF and issued a nationwide vacatur of the pistol brace rule. Now, that was a massive defeat for the federal government and the ATF. In that case, the court essentially concluded that the ATF exceeded its authority and created a rule that could not survive under the Administrative Procedures Act. After that happened, most of the remaining lawsuits challenging the rule itself actually started to collapse. The Trump administration got control of the administration, obviously, and then they decided to drop a lot of these cases that were still pending. Because once the rule was vacated nationwide, there was no longer a rule to challenge, and that's where things get really interesting for one of the last remaining cases. One of the major remaining cases is a challenge brought by Gun Owners of America in the state of Texas against the ATF. And this case is a little bit different because GOA is not simply attacking the brace rule itself. They're going after the ATF's underlying theory. The core concern in that case is, even without the rule itself, the ATF can still classify brace pistols as SBRs based purely on the statutory text. And that concern became even bigger after the DOJ openly admitted in these court filings that the vacatur of the rule did not eliminate the government's ability to enforce the underlying statute. The DOJ specifically told the court that the NFA and GCA still apply and that the rule itself imposed no criminal penalties. In other words, the government argued that even without the rule, people could still potentially face liability under the statute itself. And that is exactly what GOA has been trying to stop in this case. Now, recently, we talked about how the ATF officially proposed removing the 2023 pistol brace rule with their own proposed rule, and the goal is to remove this brace, restriction entirely from the books. And the language they used in the proposed rule is very important. The ATF says it is proposing to remove paragraphs added by the 2023 Biden rule and instead rely on the underlying statutory language, and they say that they will do that without further elaboration. That is critical because the ATF is not saying that brace pistols are always legal, that braces can never be SBRs, or that the government lacks authority over these items. Instead, the ATF is saying we are abandoning that Biden rule and that framework and going back to the old statute itself and the old, interpretation that existed prior to 2023. So practically speaking, this is a major rollback. The broad factoring criteria system that was put in place by the Biden administration is now gone. The presumption that most brace pistols are SBRs is also gone. And the ATF even states that individuals can resume purchasing firearms with attached stabilizing braces and avoid the registration if the firearm is not intended to be fired from the shoulder. So from a day-to-day perspective, the brace pistols are effectively back on the market. But legally, the ambiguity still exists because the ATF also says that it will continue relying on case-by-case classifications under the statutory definition of what is a rifle. And that means that the underlying enforcement theory is still alive, and they will just put restrictions on certain braced pistols on a case-by-case analysis. And honestly, this new proposal may actually strengthen GOA's argument in this lawsuit, because one of GOA's core concerns has always been that the ATF is claiming open-ended authority under vague statutory language without clear standards. And now the ATF is basically admitting that's exactly what they intend to do going forward. They are removing the overbroad framework that was put in place by the Biden administration, which of course was very bad, and simply they're going to revert back to the pure statutory interpretation that existed before 2023. So while the ATF is retreating from the Biden era rule itself, they are preserving the same underlying authority, and they're just saying we're going to do a case-by-case analysis based purely on the statutory text. And that kind of goes back to that old form of restriction that existed again prior to 2023. Now, in practicality, this proposed rule, if it's finalized, will likely make certain portions of this litigation moot. The direct challenge to the 2023 rule and the Administrative Procedures Act issue, of course, will become moot, especially if that rule is taken completely off the books. But the bigger constitutional and statutory question may still remain if the court believes that this case can move forward without the rule that is still in place. Because the remaining issue could still be, what authority does the ATF actually have under the statute alone? And honestly, what we may be seeing here is a strategic retreat by the ATF. The government lost badly in multiple courts. The rule faced nationwide injunctions and ultimately a nationwide vacatur. So now the ATF appears to be backing away from that aggressive Biden era framework while trying to preserve as much underlying authority as possible. So in other words, this looks a lot less like a surrender or a complete retreat from the pistol brace restrictions and more kind of like a strategic reset going back to the old standard. But again, that authority and that interpretation still remains out there. And also that does not prevent a future administration from going in and saying, we're going to restrict these, more aggressively based purely on the statutory text, or going in after the fact and trying to put in place a new rule. Now, the new ATF proposed rule still has to go through the rulemaking process. There will likely be public comments and potential revisions and additional litigation. But at the same time, the DOJ case remains extremely important and it's going to likely move forward. Right now, the court is trying to decide if they're going to moot this issue, throw the case out, or if they're going to proceed forward. And a lot of these developments are now, unraveling in the, NFA process and the whole, pistol brace restriction. A lot of that is changing right now because of what the ATF is doing with their new proposed rules. So this is something that we're going to have to watch closely to see, what impact this has on this specific lawsuit going forward, because the goal is to actually stop any future brace restrictions and really stop any future administration from just putting more restrictions on these down the road. So as we get more information, as this unravels more, I will let you guys know. If you like this video and you would like to support the channel, one of the best ways to do that is simply to like, comment, and subscribe. All of those things help to fuel the algorithm and just tells the algorithm that you appreciate this type of content, and so it shares it with more people. But as always, thank you so much for all of your support, and never forget, this nation was built by armed scholars, and this nation will be maintained by armed scholars.